everything is on the table. And that's the conversation we will have, the Prime Minister, Minister LeBlanc, and myself, with the premiers next week.
Oil and gas is owned by the provinces, principally Alberta, and we won't stand for that. And you should never, ever threaten something you cannot do.
We have to use all the tools possible when our country's under attack economically, when our province is under attack economically. You just don't roll over.
Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly says everything is on the table in response to Donald Trump's tariff threat that he could see 25% import tariffs on all Canadian goods as soon as next week. Something that, as you saw there, kind of got mixed reviews from Ontario and Alberta's premiers, with the question of blocking energy exports very much in play. Let's bring back the front bench to talk about that. Dan Moulton, Shakir Chambers, Kathleen Monk, and Hannah Thibedeau. Shakir, I'll start with you. The premiers are just a couple of days away from meeting with the Prime Minister in person. First time in almost 2 years that's going to happen. This is what they're going to focus on. Is there any pipe dream of getting everyone on the same on the same page, or does it seem impossible to you at this point?
I don't know. I mean, they need to get on the same page. You have Joly, like you said, talking about blocking energy exports. I think Jagmeet Singh came out earlier today talking about blocking critical minerals. Smith wants to double the amount of oil and gas going to the U.S. and Ford had an announcement around, resource development with the U.S. in some kind of partnership. It doesn't help us to not have this unified voice. And just the lack of leadership on the federal level is causing this issue. I think Danielle Smith has a point when she says that's one of the reasons we need an election, just so that the person in charge can have a mandate. If Trump is going to impose tariffs, if there's going to be a schedule of exemptions, someone needs a mandate to talk about, how this actually rolls out. What does that timeline look like? What can we actually trade back and forth? I think that's going to be a big issue moving forward. I do believe some of the premiers, there's probably just a lack of, if you want to say, respect for the federal government right now, given that there's just an absence of authority and an absence of someone who can command the room and negotiate with Trump in a really responsible way. So I don't see them getting on the same page moving forward. I think we're going to have a lot of different voices negotiating with Trump, and it's just not helpful for our country at this moment.
Is there any way for the feds, Kathleen, to blunt that? Like, I'm thinking of the fact that Joly announced, that she wasn't going to run because she wants to focus. She's going to be focused on that. She says she can't do both at the same time. LeBlanc basically putting forward, Dominic LeBlanc, the same argument. Is it possible to convince premiers that they are still, in a position of authority? Or does the fact that the Prime Minister is only there for a few more months, not even a few more months, kind of diffuse that possibility?
Well, it's certainly not helpful when Premier Danielle Smith goes down to Mar-a-Lago, stands in what looks like a receiving line, and spends 2 minutes with Trump, basically undermining the federal government and any sense of unity whatsoever. I mean, that's what's not helpful to a unified position. Basically, President-elect Trump is declaring economic warfare on Canada, and she's saying, hey, let's unilaterally disarm. Before they even had these robust discussions. And I certainly understand that oil and gas is the jurisdiction of the provinces, but come on, people, we have to have a unified response. And the fact that she's going completely offside from even her fellow premiers, whether it's Premier Eby or Premier Ford. I look forward to hearing from Premier Canoe this Wednesday as well at that meeting, because we need to hear more of his voice, I think, and actually have a rational response. I mean, we know that the U.S. needs not only our critical minerals, but frankly, our oil and gas. Actually, the economist Jim Stanford, who you're probably familiar with, put out a paper today that said 3/4 of the stuff that we actually export to the U.S., they make a huge profit off of. This is what Donald Trump likes. He likes big profits. He likes big margins. And so we need to start making that case, but it doesn't help at all when Premier, frankly, Smith is offside. And so, yeah, we can talk about the need for a mandate, but frankly, Canadians have given our government a mandate. We are fighting for our jobs, we're fighting for our sovereignty, and we're fighting for our economy. So it's kind of fun politics to say, the feds can't pull it off. It is their job to pull it off. And that's why I think you're seeing some of the cabinet ministers, like you mentioned, whether it's Joly, whether it's LeBlanc, and even Champagne, who we'll probably hear from tomorrow, say that we're out because we've got to do this mission right now.
It is their job, certainly, as Kathleen points out, Hannah, but it's not just partisans who are raising the idea that they might be in a sort of weakened position. It was David McNaughton, who is, a close ally of this government, essentially stating both this time and the last time he was on the show that it is complex and it is not necessarily the best position that we're coming from because of that.
And if you listen to McNaughton, if you listen to Mr. Chrétien, other leaders, Mr. Harper, what they're saying is nothing's going to help with the tit-for-tat war here. Just imagine if we do that with our oil and gas. 25% of Canada's exports to the United States is oil and gas. That's a big chunk. And if we do a tit-for-tat on that, it's not just going to be an economic force that we're going to see from Donald Trump. We're going to see military force from him. He's going to be mad because that's really going to affect his people. And that's not something that I think he really wants to see. This isn't how he wants to start his administration. And also, you have to think as well that you're going to get a press release, maybe on Monday, when the inauguration happens, saying we're going to implement these tariffs. You're still going to have months, probably 6 months, before anything happens. So there's still that time frame as well. So yes, it is kind of take a breath on this. People need to start talking with one voice. And all of those premiers do have to get together and sit around and communicate properly.
Yeah.
The communication is so fractured.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
I just don't think that I think in this instance, this isn't the same, Dan, as steel and aluminum, where we can target, bourbon and in certain places. Like this would be an instant recession here that is broad-based in nature. So our response, like if it involves an export tax on oil and gas, which would hit them very hard, regardless of whether or not he gets mad or not, how are you going to form a consensus view on something like that?
Well, look, I think I'd start by saying that I'm not sure I entirely disagree that it's unhelpful for provincial premiers to be making the case in the way that they are. I think in the first round of national negotiations, a whole broad swath of Canadians in governments and in business leadership roles coast to coast were enlisted in an effort to make the case for Canada south of the border, and it was effective as a strategy. I think it is useful to continue to have premiers playing that role, to be executing on it. I think the Prime Minister's bringing together provincial premiers this week to demonstrate that there is a coherent plan and try and present it as such, because I would concede to criticism that thus far the federal government has not presented as coherent a plan as they did in 2017, 2018. So let's hope that part of what we see coming out of this meeting with the premiers is a reorientation in that effort. When it comes to our response, though, it is going to come from the federal government. It doesn't matter if Danielle Smith objects to it. In fact, I think it was Doug Ford who first introduced the idea of cutting off electricity trade with the United States in response. And so the federal government is going to make those decisions. They're the ones who are going to implement that leadership. The premiers can agree or disagree, but I don't necessarily think it's unhelpful for Danielle Smith to have gone to Mar-a-Lago or for the premiers to be going to Washington, D.C. on February 12th. In fact, I think that can be part of a helpful strategy if it is coherently coordinated together, of course.
Yeah, full court press is what it was called back in the old days of 2017. Last word to you, Shakir.
Listen, the tariffs are coming. Doug Ford said that weeks ago when they had that press conference. He was unequivocal that he knew tariffs were coming. Smith said it earlier today, tariffs are coming. So I think as a country, we need to understand what our response is going to be and what that plan looks like to either get some exemptions or get them removed completely.
Okay, I'm going to leave it there. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it. Our front bench, Kathleen Monk, Shakir Chambers, Dan Moulton, and Hannah Thibedeau. Our takeaway is next. More Power Play just ahead.